Good evening. My name is Megan Mosley, and tonight we're going to go over the introduction for Baghdad burning. So let's grab some tea and get cracking. All right, so if you remember from the foreword, we discussed Baghdad burning and some of the reviews that at the time probably meant like a compliment, although we could work on that. All right, so we've got Riverbend was an Iraqi woman. I don't know whether she's alive or not anymore. We don't know. It's last time we heard she was in Syria, but that was before Syria was bombed. So we're kind of dealing with a lot of unknowns about the blogger. This entire book is based off of the blogger Riverbend and her story during the occupation and the invasion of Iraq for Operation Iraqi Freedom after 9/11 and in 2004 and 2005 and 6. So this book was published in 2005 based off of her blogs. There's a lot that's unknown about her, but we're going to get into it. This is just the introduction part. If you want to read the foreword or the reviews, just go to that one. So I've already recorded that. Okay, so when we go to the introduction, this book is written by a young woman whom we know only by the name Riverbend, who calls her blog Baghdad Burning and describes it simply as a girl blog from Iraq. For more than a year, this anonymous girl blog has made the war and occupation real in terms that no professional journalist could hope to achieve. We don't know much about Riverbend. She is in her mid-20s and lives in what seems to be a middle-class section of Baghdad with her mother, father, and brother. Before the war, she had a job involving computers. Mind you, this is 2005. That's a very vague thing. Her job involved computers, which at that time was actually a pretty big deal. Anything that had the word computer in it was still very, very big and very nuanced. So she writes in excellent English with a slight American inflection. So there's very little background into where she came from. Mind you, I went to an international school in high school, so people are very well educated all across the world. They could be in a third world country, and even if they were in a middle class, came from a middle class background, they could still afford to send their kids to have a very good education. So never underestimate that. New entries to her blog appear sometimes daily, sometimes days, or even weeks apart. And to many of her readers, these entries have become perhaps the most important source of news from Iraq. Now I'm going to pronounce it Iraq, depending upon my feeling and how I also pronounce it as a Texan. So keep that in mind. I am going to get it incorrect. It'll be fine. We'll go about it as we can. Now then, Riverbend's news has nothing to do with troop movements, casualty figures, or the latest from the Green Zone, the subjects of mainstream news reports. For Riverbend, war is something that is lived every day and every night. She and her brother E sit on the roof to watch Baghdad burning and have learned to identify different types of automatic weapons by the sound of their volleys. Occupation is a way of life. It means rounding up enough friendly armed men to take the kids to the store to buy crayons. It means trying to bury an elderly aunt in a city where the mosques are all overbooked for funerals and the cemeteries are full. It means jumping up in the middle of the night when the electricity briefly comes on in order to run the washing machine or work on her blog. Once you are in Riverbend, her war becomes your war. You begin to see things through her eyes and those of her family. You read in the news about a raid on a section of Baghdad, and immediately you want to check her blog, hoping her house wasn't on that block. You hear of an airstrike and nervously wonder whether her mother got E off of the roof in time. Whenever Riverbend and her family travel out of the neighborhood to a family gathering, you travel with her, as she describes every turn the car takes, the tension as it rounds a corner, hoping there is not an American tank in the street. If she does not write for several days, maybe a week or more, you fear the worst, a bomb strike, a tank raid, imprisonment. Then she reappears, explaining that the electricity has been off, or sometimes that things were so depressing that she just couldn't bring herself to write. Riverbend has plenty of well-informed, acid opinions on the follies of the Bush administration. She is scornful of the American puppets of the Iraqi interim government, and she brings readers fresh insights on the factions within the Iraqi populace. She despises the gangs of religious fundamentalists who make it impossible for women to hold jobs or walk alone in the streets. She slaps back at detractors on the net, sending out a tart response to their jibes. It's all darkly perspective and well worth reading, but remains are her accounts of war as an experience lived day by day. It is both quotidian and absolutely riveting. And once you begin to read Riverbend, it's unlikely you will stop. Background. Riverbend's culture is rooted in one of the oldest and richest civilizations in the world. Her nation was created by Western colonialism, driven by a desire to control its most valuable natural resource. The current political boundaries in the oil-producing regions of the Middle East go back to the opening years of the 20th century. Even then, plotting its strategy against the Germans in anticipation of World War I, the British Navy decided to change the fuel for its battleships from coal to oil. And British aggressively expanded its exploratory oil holdings in the Middle East. Its early stake in the region and its victory in the war left Britain well positioned in the power grab that came with the post-war breakup of the Ottoman Empire. Now I'm going to add something here after the breakup, the post-World War I breakup of the Ottoman Empire. In 1920, the League of Nations awarded the British a mandate to govern areas of the Middle East, including what is now Iraq. Soon, the British were awash in the Middle East oil and sought to expand its market into the United States. Until that time, the U.S. oil business had been in the vice grip of Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company. In reaction to the British strike at its market, the American oil industry came up with an aggressive plan of its own. The government and industry issued warnings to the public of the impending dire shortage of petroleum, paving the way for higher prices to support more U.S. oil exploration and development. Then the Americans pushed into the Middle East themselves, going toe-to-toe with the British. Eventually, the competing companies worked out a cooperative agreement for divvying up the oil through an entity called the Iraq Petroleum Company. This one is the IPC. This overall agreement survived the end of the British mandate, years of co-ops and counter-co-ops in Iraq, and the rise of the Ba'ath Party, B-A-A-T-H, Ba'ath Party, up to the growth of OPEC, Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, in the early 1970s. It then underwent a series of transformations, with OPEC made up of state companies gaining more of a grip on the basic oil and gas resources, while Western companies continued to dominate the processing and transportation of the fuels. British and French influence in the region gradually diminished as their colonial empires withered, while U.S. involvement grew. At the center of the new order was Aramco, the giant combine of American and Saudi interests that has dominated life in Saudi Arabia for decades. Saudi Arabia long has been the repository of the largest oil reserves in the world. It grew in importance during World War II as a source of fuel for the Allied armies in the war against the Nazis. It also became an early outpost and resource bin for the United States in the Cold War, and in its struggle against emerging Middle Eastern nationalism, which threatened the U.S. control of oil. The Saudis played a role in drawing Egypt away from the Soviet orbit. The United States persuaded the Saudis to help finance covert action against various enemies, most notably the Russians, who had moved into Afghanistan. Mind you, this is in the 70s, okay? So we're not even to present day yet. We're still in the 70s. The history tends to repeat. And in Iran, the United States fomented the 1953 co-op that ousted a democratic nationalist government and restored the Shah. So basically, in Iran in the 70s, they had a very democratic culture and government where women could wear miniskirts and did wear miniskirts. And it was democratically elected, and CIA agents from the United States went in there and destroyed it all. And they basically made it a fundamentalist government. Yep. So, the United States fomented the 1953 coup that ousted a democratic nationalist government and restored the Shah, and paved the road to the Iranian Revolution in 1979. So they had a government, they had a democratic government until 1953, and then they had to have a revolution in 1979 that took out the American puppet and then put in a fundamentalist religious group. The United States quickly turned to Iraq and to its new president, Saddam Hussein, as a counterweight to Iran. American agricultural exports to Iraq were stepped up, along with various forms of aid. This included substantial military aid to Saddam during the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, which, by the way, was absolutely decimating. I remember very clearly seeing mounds and mounds and mounds of soldier helmets from the 1980s Iraq-Iran War. It was absolutely devastating to see, because it's never the old men that are in those helmets. It also may have included the export of components for gas warfare, which Saddam used both on the Iranians and Iraq's own Kurdish minority. Yes, they used genocide. They committed genocide against the Kurdish population that was native to that region. Everything changed in an instant for U.S.-Iraqi relations and for the well-being of the Iraqi people when Saddam invaded Kuwait in 1990, and the United States responded with a brief but deadly war. The Gulf War and after. The Iraq in which Riverbend grew up was an Iraq shaped by the 1991 Persian Gulf War. She would have been just entering her teens when the war took place. The full effect of this first war and of a 12-year period of economic sanctions on the 26 million people who live in Iraq is different to gauge, and few government or mainstream media sources have even attempted to do so. We know that in the first Gulf War, 293 American military personnel were killed. 293 American military personnel were killed. Our allies lost 50 or more, so not very much. Beth Osborne de Ponte, a respected demographer now at Yale University, estimated that in 1993, 56,000 Iraqi soldiers and 3,500 Iraqi civilians died during the fighting. So we had only less than 300 American soldiers die to 56,000 and more, along with almost 4,000 civilian casualties. So DePonte estimated that additional conflicts in the immediate post-war period, which included a Shiite uprising in southern Iraq, killed 5,000 more soldiers and 30,000 civilians. The figures provided by DuPont, who at the time was working at the U.S. Census Bureau, were controversial. in part because she had contradicted then Pentagon boss Dick Cheney. Oh, gotta love Dick Cheney. He's my fave. Such a drag queen he is. He had declared at the end of the war, "We have no way of knowing precisely how many casualties occurred, and," quote, "we may never know." They always know the numbers. Just know that. They always know the numbers. It's easy to count the dead. The war's indirect effects took a much larger toll. According to DePonte, by the end of 1991, 10 months after the February ceasefire, mind you, this is Gulf War I, health problems caused by the war led to 111,000, over 100,000 more deaths, of which 70,000 were children under 15. So we lost 300 soldiers, and the year following, they lost over 70,000 children. This was in 1991, 1990, and 1991. In fact, the damage had only just begun. The 1991 Gulf War left Saddam Hussein in power and punished the Iraqis for that fact by also leaving in place the UN sanctions that had been imposed in 1990 when Saddam invaded Kuwait. So remember, Saddam was supposed to be a savior. He was supposed to be part of the revolution. And what did he become? He became exactly what the United States wanted him to become. Now this is all here said and gone. That history does apply, but for real. Richard Garfield, a Columbia University nursing professor whose work is also highly regarded, estimates in a report completed in 2003 that there were from about 345,000 to 530,000 excess deaths of children under 5 between 1990 and 2002. Mind you, that is over 12 years, over the course of 12 years, in a very large population. And when I say large, I mean like a country's population, which a city in the United States can sometimes have more people in it than an entire country. So keep that in mind. That comes down to about 100 children a day dying due to the Gulf War and the subsequent sanctions. So they were starving, they were poisoned, and amongst other things that can cause lead to death, especially amongst our vulnerable population of young children under 5. So with sanctions also come sanctions on our antibiotics and things amongst those things. Garfield's figures do not include the second or 2003 war. So that's the Operation Iraqi Freedom and the invasion of Iraq and the occupation of Iraq. So that's not even counting those numbers. This was before all Gulf War II even started. From 1990 through 1996, the sanctions meant that Iraq could not sell oil to generate income. So much of the death is from poverty and the consequences of poverty. The sanctions meant that Iraq could not sell oil to generate income. Keep that in mind for the future. A 2004 Commence Department study noted that historically oil was responsible for 3/4 of Iraq's GDP and over 90% of its foreign exchange income. The sanctions extended and exacerbated the humanitarian crisis generated by the Gulf War's destruction of Iraq's infrastructure. If you have no hospitals, you have no antibiotics, you have no surgeries, you have no way for doctors to do anything, you cannot educate your doctors, there's a lot of problems that run with sanctions that can be felt generations later. The 1991 war crippled the electric power system, reducing generating capacity from around 5 gigawatts to 1.8 gigawatts, according to a report in Middle East Economic Survey. Now, I don't know if that survey is still findable or if it's around, but it is a 1991 Middle East Economic Survey where the electric power system went from a capacity of 5 gigawatts to 1.8 gigawatts. This affected not only civilian life in Iraqi cities and towns, but also its agricultural production, which depended on electric power for its irrigation systems. Remember, this is the desert, so most of their water comes from oil, or it comes from wells and canals and rivers. And you need electricity to push water either against gravity from a well, to pump it from underneath the ground, to pump it out, or to take the water from the riverbed up to a field. So that's what they're needing it for. Food supplies were reduced, and by the mid-1990s, 1/3 of the country's children under the age of 5 were malnourished. Supplies of clean drinking water were initially reduced by half as Iraq's system of pumping stations crashed. The activities of the public health system were cut in half by the war and remained compromised under sanctions. Now, as a public health, I'm going to go ahead and give a side note here. And as a public health professional, I can tell you that our job is not merely to tell people to put on a mask or put on gloves. Our job is to make sure that we have an overall bird's eye view of what it takes to take care of the well-being, the overall well-being, and the health of an entire nation. Or community, or city, or state, or a family. That's the job of a public health professional. And we need more of them, especially now. Now then, let me fix my glasses. The activities of the public health system were cut in half by the war, and this is the Gulf War I, and remained compromised under sanctions. The number of diarrhea episodes in children under the age of 5 quadrupled from 1991 to 1996, so we're still in the 90s. And guess what? During the Black Plague, it wasn't the Black Plague. It wasn't the plague itself that killed people. It was how quickly you lost hydration that killed you. Because a lot of these really intense diseases, the flu, all of that stuff, the reason why you die from them is not because it's attacking an organ or it's killing your heart or it's stopping your heart or anything. No, it's dehydration. Anything that causes you to lose mass dehydration is what is going to kill you, and that's what makes a death that's what makes a disease so difficult to survive, is because you literally lose so much of your hydration, your salts, your electrolytes, your water in your body, and you need all of those things. You cannot just drink water and think you're going to be fine. You need electrolytes, you need salt, sugar, things like that create that connection between electrodes to keep your body functioning, because your body is literally energy from electricity, and it needs salts and sugars. Sugars for the mitochondrial, salts for your nerves. They all work together. After the war, school attendance fell and the literacy rate quickly declined. So this was what Riverbend is. This is the context of what she lived through. This was even before the Iraqi invasion. The UN's Oil for Food program, which began in 1996, permitted some export. The program generated $27 billion for humanitarian purposes, providing the financial equivalent of 50 cents a day for every Iraqi. The income might have been much higher, but the United States extracted reparations for the 1991 war. So we lost 300, just to go into this little side note again. We, the United States Army or military, lost 300 soldiers in, a couple months? And over the course of the 90s, they lose so many children. They lose a huge portion of their children to diarrhea and malnutrition and poison and disease, and they have to pay us reparations? Are you kidding me? When we were the ones that said, here, Iraq, we need to test these weapons of mass destruction, i.e. this poison, Agent Orange. We need to test all these other things. A lot of these dictators are not dictators because they just had the idea to be a dictator. No, they became dictators because they had support from somebody that was more powerful than them, that wanted something in exchange. What do you think that was? That was the United States trying to figure out how to either grow an industry and create business for subcontractors, which I know a lot of people don't want to hear about. And we can get into that another time. Or it was trying to create a better way and a faster way to hurt their enemies or kill their enemies without taking it out on their own people. So they use dictators as little testing grounds, and then they push all the blame on the dictators. Mind you, the dictators are definitely to blame because they did it. Just know that they wouldn't have done it if they hadn't had the support to do so. And we're usually a lot bigger than these dictators and much more powerful, although I don't know about now. Okay, so the program generated $27 billion for humanitarian purposes, providing the financial equivalent of 50 cents a day for every Iraqi. The income might have been higher, much higher, but the United States extracted reparations for the 1991 war. Now that's a hell of a life insurance on 300 soldiers. The program did help feed Iraqi's people and rebuild some of its infrastructure, but the country's basic standard of living never returned to pre-Gulf War levels. By the end of 2004, details of the alleged corruption that surrounded the Bit Oil for Food program were just beginning to become widely known. We're getting into the corruption part. Charges of corruption from investigators launched by, among others, the U.S. Congress. Why would the U.S. Congress want to go after somebody that was taking their money for corruption? Unless members of the U.S. Congress were about to get in trouble, or so they wanted to rat somebody out before they got in trouble, or there was something else going on. And that's what we need to investigate. So, charges of corruption from investigations launched by, among others, the U.S. Congress culminated in Republican right-wing calls for the resignation of Kofi Annan and demands for the U.S. to block further payments to the international organization. But that money's already been allocated. That's a very interesting thing, because at that point, if they're saying, no, we don't want to pay Kofi because, he's tied to corruption. Well, no kidding. You put him there. How do you think he got to that point where he could be corrupt? So the money's already been allocated to Kofi, but now you're saying you don't need to pay Kofi because he's corrupt. So now who gets to keep the money? Because it's certainly not going to go back to the taxpayer. Who gets to keep that money? Where does that money get reallocated? These are the types of questions you should be asking yourself. So where did the money go that the Republicans in the 2004, where did the money go that was supposed to go to Kofi? What did the Republicans do with it? That's something to look up. So, they demanded for the U.S. to block further payments to the international organization. So they blocked the payments, but they've still got the money in the bank account. What do they do with it? In short, alleged corruption was immediately put to political use in the U.S. by a right wing that has always detested the UN and sought for years to get rid of it. So they get two birds with one stone. One, they get to keep the money that they were supposed to pay to Kofi, so they never have to pay Kofi back. They never have to pay their bills. Screw Kofi. We'll just send him back to the UN for him to get put in jail or something, or put charges of human rights. Whatever happened to Kofi, I can't remember. I can't remember all of it. But then what happens to the money? It gets used in some other way. Similar, but we may never know. All right, so let's go on to the 2003 war. So this is the introduction, of course. We're still on the introduction because we're merely giving context to Riverbend's blog. Because remember, it is a stream. Her blog is a stream of consciousness. It is not a well-curated, crafted story. It is her experience. Every waking moment that she has to write something down, she does. It is first draft only, not final. Never final. She never gets there. And mind you, I don't think she ever will. It's been 20 years. The Bush administration appears to have determined to go to war against Saddam as a primary foreign policy goal well before 9/11. So even before 9/11 happened, they knew they needed to get rid of Saddam. They knew it. The question is how? How do you get rid of somebody that is a country leader that cannot be voted out? Because even within democracy, you can still, it's kind of easy to get rid of a politician because you just, quote unquote, vote him out. Well, who's counting the votes? Okay, you've finally got somebody that's good at counting votes. Good for them. Well, who goes and registers to vote, and who's the people voting? Are we really sure that they're in that county and then that supposed to be voting in that election? We don't know. So what do you do when you have a dictator who cannot be voted out? Well, now we're getting to the good stuff. Okay. So the Bush administration, for the 2003 war, the Bush administration appears to have determined to go to war against Saddam as a primary foreign policy goal well before 9/11. Claims of faulty UN inspections, weapons of mass destruction, and a tenuous connection to 9/11 were the publicly stated reasons for the attack. All have been proven clearly false. The war, as defined by the administration, the mission that was declared accomplished on May 2nd, 2003, was destructive but brief. It has now been overshadowed by the occupation, a scene of ongoing fighting, ongoing casualties among both coalition forces and Iraqi forces and foreign civilians, and ongoing destruction to Iraq's infrastructure and civil society. It is this scene that Riverbend describes so vividly in her blog. So let's take a break and let's think about this, okay? We're still on the introduction. We don't know that much about Riverbend, okay? I've got another 1, 2, 2.5, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. We have 7 pages more of this introduction. And we're at 34 minutes. This is going to take us a minute, but it's okay. Because really, what you're here for is to fall asleep. And if you need to fall asleep to my voice, that's totally okay. Just know that you're safe here. We're going to get through this, okay? History always repeats itself. The question is, what are going to be the consequences? The consequences are always different every time it repeats itself. Because the players are different. The people are different. You are different. We have to learn how to safeguard ourselves when things like this happen. I'm going to go ahead and take this headband off because it hurts. Okay. Let's go back to this. So, we're now in the part where it actually pertains directly to Riverbend. It is the context of what she's about to describe in this blog of hers that ends up taking up 286 pages. And it ends, let's first go. I don't have my stand for my mic. So it starts. She starts. Let me see if I can find the first journal entry. She starts her blog on Sunday, August 17th, 2003. She ends on 9/11/2004 in Fallujah, an Iraqi home. Posted by River at 2:49 p.m. We're going to continue the rest of it in section 2 of the introduction.